Hi guys, and welcome to Changing Gears episode 3. My name is Tunn, and I'm joined this week once again by Toby and Frew. Changing Gears, if you've never listened or watched before, of course, is our weekly EU podcast here for the Gears of War scene in Europe. And we've gotten to our third episode, third week in a row, and we've lost somebody. We've lost Elliot. He's managed to scrape out of this one. Not really quite sure how.
He'll be back, I'm sure. We're just swapping the roster around a bit. Toby was missing the first week. I mean, maybe it's my turn next week.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you can have a break next week. We'll draft L back in. We'll draft L back in. But lots to talk about today, boys, because obviously the process for Pro League Qualification did start on Sunday and created quite a stir. It has to be said. We will obviously go through the results, etc. There's quite a lot to talk through in that regard. But a few, I don't want to say complaints, but complaints in the end is what it turned out to be about this being an online qualification, and some of the issues that were surrounding it are something that was probably to be expected, you'd imagine, Toby.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's probably growing pains. The main concern for players was, I think, just general communication with the admin team. Maybe some unfamiliarity with Gears rules and how things typically done. And I think the players, I think the biggest issue on that note is actually the players trying to organize best of threes in rounds where there's not supposed to be best of threes. You know, a gentleman's agreement, if you will. And Alex, I think, summarized this perfectly. We talked to him last week. Hey, this isn't with the rules. If a gentleman's agreement falls through, then that's on you. The admins can't support rules that don't exist, right? So, don't get angry if the opposing team falls through on that agreement. I guess it's up for debate as to whether these rounds should be best of three for the players, but from a logistical standpoint, spectators, casters, staff, etc., we can't have best of threes throughout, because then the tournaments would be way too long. They would last way too long. These are online tournaments at the end of the day. We don't have all hours in the day to get things going and keep things going. So
do you not think it would be an idea to maybe do it over 2 days?
You start to get the issue then of teams being able to make it one day and not the other, and
True, yeah.
Then you start to get teams that can't attend. And I think at the moment the thing for Gears is to get as many teams involved as possible, right? We're notoriously a smaller esport, and we want to get as many of those early doors teams into these tournaments and participating weekly as we can. And I think 2 days might start to stretch that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was just a potential throwing it out there that you could maybe do, because I mean, again, I keep hopping on about Call of Duty a little bit, but that's what used to happen. You would do like the final few rounds or so, maybe like from quarters onwards on the day after, because it's only that point would only take a few hours, I suppose. So I don't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I don't know. I think it could be an idea if that is sort of a complaint in the future, but we'll see how it goes, because I think realistically there's always going to be these issues when you are playing online. It's not a LAN tournament that's being ran over 3 days. It is one of these things that there are other variables, and an online tournament, same with any other game. It's happening on every single game that has online qualification or something. There's always an issue that is out of people's control, but that's just the nature of the beast. And you can't literally have every single competitive Gears event or Gears game series map on LAN all year long. It can't be done unless you are literally throwing millions at this sort of thing, because we know how much it costs. It costs a ridiculous amount of money to be doing this in terms of having everything on LAN. In a perfect world, I think every single game, including Gears, including COD, every single game would have every game on LAN if it was feasible cost-wise. But unfortunately, it's not. Online
when
play
you've
has
got
to come into
230 LATAM teams, right? I mean,
exactly.
There's logistical reasons as well. Like I just said, maybe we're a smaller esport, but in some regions, so many teams. And I think, touching on what Toby said, most of the complaints that I've seen so far have been down to player issues, or players just not following what they're supposed to be doing. Set up the rules properly. There's a list in front of you. It's not difficult to go down them. Play the bracket that is in front of you. So you've got a best of one. You play a best of one. And the teams that have been complaining about that format of being best of one are usually the teams that lost that best of one. So, what can you do, really? The teams that are winning it, they won all their games. And in the end of the day, we've seen some interesting scores, some interesting, routes through these brackets from teams that usually we would have seen the other way around in a best of 3. So in terms of shaking it up, it's done its job a little bit. And also it's about consistency, right, Chris? It's about getting the best teams through over the course of now 5 weeks, because they've extended it another week. So just because you lost one bracket doesn't mean you're going to lose all 5.
Yeah, well, exactly. The way it's set up, even if you've lost your first game, you can probably still go on to qualify if you have another good 4 weeks. I mean, I just wanted to go tweet from Jack Reaction. So him and his team got snaked by some on their squad who moved away to a different team, and that checked them out for the tournament. Of course, that's not necessarily the best thing in the world, but they have a chance to regain because there's so many different qualification processes but there's so many more opportunities, of course, to get a hold of these points to hit the qualification point. So it's not completely over for anybody yet. That is the good thing with having it over a long period of time. You can have a bad weekend and still possibly get away with it. Of course, obviously, it's not ideal. A consistent placement every week would be the ideal scenario for anybody. But as you said, there's opportunity still there.
And I think you mentioned Jack, obviously European region player, and I think they've probably got the toughest chance, right? Because out of all of the top, I'm going to say top 3 teams, right? The top team from each region, we'd probably formally say NRG, Ghost, EU's Finest, right? Well, EU's Finest look to be miles ahead of the competition in Europe, at least. And the other regions, NRG and Ghost, they both lost in top 16. So those regions, there's a lot more points flying about because that top team hasn't taken all of the points so far. Whereas EU's Finest, if they continue as they're going currently, they'll probably win tonight, and they'll probably win the qualifier, which means there's a lot less points to be handed out below, which keeps it even closer, right? It means that there isn't that huge gap between the top 2, 3 teams. There's just a huge gap between the top 1 team. The rest of the teams, it's quite easy to catch up. So
yeah, and just to touch on that result, of course, NRG obviously optic for the most part, losing to Mesa Gaming. Mesa Gaming, no spring chickens, exclusive lava. These are solid players, but still, it's something that you maybe expected the dominance to continue on that side of the pond. Based on this, maybe not, but I think it's hard to really draw too many lines this early on. As we said last week, the game is still in its infancy. I think people will still be figuring stuff out. So I think it's hard to say. We are seeing the teams that we expected to be at the top, but maybe not yet. It could still take a while, but not. I don't think as I said, it's the same for these sort of teams. You expect to be in the Pro League, expect to be at the top, winning these events. They still have 4 more weeks to try it. So that is the positives of online.
Yeah, if the same happens again this Sunday, then I'd start to be getting a little bit of a worry on the go if I was NRG. But quite honestly, I watched that whole series. They were squad streaming. I got to see it from many points of view, and it wasn't like a blowout. They were competitive. It was a super close game. In the end, Mesa clutched up a couple of rounds and took it with a couple of rounds to spare. But NRG they looked strong. They looked okay, and I think if I was them, I wouldn't be worrying. I don't think they will be worrying. I think they'll just be looking at the next tournament and seeing what they can do there.
Let's touch on one of the issues that has been brought up a few times already on social media. Was the fact that the games were best out of 1. Was it up until the final they were all best out of 1? Yeah. So I think, when teams are then starting to GA, as you said, to go with the best out of 3, the rules are out of their hands. How do you see it? Because I know we sort of half talked about this already, but how do you see it? Do you think we should be going through best out of 1s just for the time scale, or do you think they should be spreading it or bringing it in at least earlier? Because best out of 1 is like, there's no chance for like a veto or anything as far as I'm aware. Like, does it come down to? I mean, I suppose you could GA and just say, look, let's have a vote of what map we want to play, etc. But you don't. If you're bad at the map that gets picked, then bother like instantly.
It's a tough scenario, isn't it? Because in an ideal world, you would have best of 3s for every single game on LAN, wouldn't you? But logistically, it makes it so you do need best of 1s at least the very majority of the tournament. I would say maybe kind of cutting down the middle a little bit with this would be perhaps push for semis to be best of 3s as well.
Yeah.
Any further than that, though, I think the length of the tournament then becomes a little bit too much. And then when you get to the discussion of gentlemen's agreements, what's fair? What if half of the quarters are having gentlemen's agreements, having best of 3, and the other half are having best of 1s, And the teams that lose the best of ones are calling out the other side of the bracket. Hey, we would have done best of 3. We were really weak on that map that we just played and lost and got lost points out on as a result.
Yep.
So hey, why can they do that? And why can't we? And that really brings up some issues.
Breaks the fairness, right?
For administration, fairness, integrity as a whole for the structure of the tournament.
Yep.
One of the big issues, I think, for a lot of teams, and why perhaps some teams in Europe are panicking about the first tournament in particular, is the fact that the brackets were random. Of course, there's no seeding. There's going to be no seeding.
First tournament, yeah, I don't know.
First tournament, what you expect. And so it can be a roll of the dice as to who gets EU's finest earlier for a lot of these teams, because a lot of teams believe, hey, we're gonna get beat by EU's finest. Let's accept that. Let's actually focus on the next best opponent that we can possibly beat. Think R damage. Think Pain's
around the world as well.
Around the world.
Yep.
Think of those squads, not EU's finest. But then you have a team that's looking extremely good on the first and second round. Oh, they've got EU's finest. We won't see them play any of the top teams, and then they're obviously second guessing. Hey, but we really felt like we could have beat the rest of the teams in this tournament today, apart from EU's finest. But we've had EU's finest first, and now we've got X points, and they've got more. And so that's kind of the big talking point, I think, for EU teams. Hey, we didn't get the best bracket. What's next week going to be? What if this happens again? Oh, then that's half the tournaments, or it would be 2 out of 5 now. This really reduces our chances. This isn't fair, etc., etc. Yep. So that's definitely something to consider, I guess.
So that's why for me, I guess the best of 3, best of 1 situation is kind of null and void. The time just negates the fact that you can't do best of 3s throughout the whole thing. So final, fair be it, be a best of 3. What I would prefer to see is just a losers bracket. You've got 2 chances then, right? And if you lose to EU's finest in a best of 1, but then you drop into the losers bracket and you best of 1 all the way through there as well, there's that potential that you may end up just clawing a few of those little placements back and getting some of those points back. Whereas if it's best of 3 and you come up against EU's finest, you lose to them twice, right? And you're out anyway. It doesn't matter if it's best of 1 and best of 3 in that situation. So the losers bracket route, it can run in parallel to the main bracket as well, right? So it's not like it's going to add
true.
A little bit on, but
like a couple of rounds, right? But in a best of 1, a couple of rounds is 40 minutes. I think all teams would rather play for an extra 40 minutes to an hour than play a single elimination best of 1.
That's a really good point.
That's my feel.
I think teams would even be willing to get on an hour or 2 earlier if it meant they could have a double elimination bracket rather than single. I think perhaps for a lot of these teams, perhaps less more amateur teams, they have to weigh up their time spent and organization getting on, and then hey, a single elimination, we could literally lose 1 game and then be done, and then that's my plans for the day. Elsewhere in life, you messed up. If it's double elimination, I think that's a bit more of a bit more
it makes sense,
interesting, doesn't it, for those amateur teams when they come to that decision? Hey, should we play, should we not? I've got something to do. But it's double elimination, we could actually do something.
Look, I think it's not as big of a deal like Europe. 36 teams in the end for Europe qualification. Disappointing or
no?
Happy with that?
36 teams, I think, is a good amount. I mean, well,
I would have liked to have seen 64 for the first one. I kind of feel 32 is a little bit too. Like looking at the other regions, so let's take APAC as an example. They didn't have too many. I think they had about 26 teams, and generally they've been a much smaller region. NA, they had 120 odd teams. Latin America, 118 teams. LATAM, 230 teams, I think it was in the end. So like the scale of difference, it's almost 10 times the difference. And for me, I kind of feel like Europe has more
of a population.
But again, it kind of comes down to, are we targeting those communities? Are we targeting the Italian community? Are we targeting the Spanish community? Because you need to localize. You need to reach out to these players. You can't just expect to throw things out in English and hope that these Spanish communities, Italian communities, French communities all pick up on that. And you got to reach out to them. And I don't think that was done as well as it should have been done. Whether or not that's an issue, though, looking at the LATAM region, I don't know. They still got 230 teams. They put out and they showed up.
Yeah, Gears is huge in LATAM.
It is. But
it's massive, isn't it?
It was
almost like a different game.
in all the countries in Europe as well, right?
Yeah. I was about to say, I mean, 36 teams on paper. When I heard EU, hey, that does sound good, but then I'm just thinking, hold on
That's
a second, this is
online.
the first online tournament.
Yeah.
You'd be happy with that
Major.
if it was a
I would-
LAN, you'd be happy.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I jumped the gun on that one. Definitely, we would wanted a fair bit more at least. It's not abysmal, don't get me wrong. We aren't like incredibly concerned, but it is, you feel like a missed opportunity perhaps for the whole
I mean, they got 4
region
more.
to capitalize on.
They got
The
4
thing
more
it-
opportunities, but I
Yeah.
think
There are a lot more chances. But
Yeah.
the thing that's concerning to me is that I'd imagine PGL and Gears Esports are going to be looking at these numbers to look at, you know, later events in the calendar year, so to speak, in the coming quarters, and they'll be using those numbers to determine, okay, we should have a regional here and we should have a regional here, and without those numbers originally, Europe will probably get less support than it should have done, and you know that will result to fewer teams down the line as well. So that's the bit that worries me a little bit, is future support versus, you know, initial pickup.
Yeah, agreed.
But I mean, for all the disappointment in the EU region, everybody else really good turnout. Obviously, as you said, specifically in LATAM, I mean that's insane. That's a lot of teams. That's what you would expect from the region, and we know how massive it is there. But yeah. I think, you know, we managed to, the first Trip Cap Cup we had on, we hit 32 teams there. So
yeah,
I mean, look, this is for the qualification for the Pro League. Yes, okay, there's not a cash prize like there is with Trip Cap Cup, etc. But at the same time, it's not all about that. You know, the Pro League qualification is a very, very important thing. So maybe a little bit too few in that one for me. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in weeks 2, 3, 4, and now number 5 that has now been announced. But any more issues sort of with it being online? I think that will pretty much cover the majority of it. I think we're pretty much there with it. In terms of results, though, nothing too surprising in Europe for me looking at it from the outset. I mean, EU's finest going on to win is fully expected. Any surprises for you across the board, boys?
Not so much a surprise, but I think props has to be given to around the world. I mean, this is just looking at the European bracket. Around the world, they came through a pretty tough bracket themselves in the terms of things. I mean, our damage, they came in. You know, and that's a name that's not thrown around lightly. Our Damage is a long-standing French team that have, you know, historically been in that top 2, usually second.
Yeah.
But they have been in that top 2 for years upon years. So to come in and kind of sweep them, I think a congratulations is in order to around the world. They did very well, and they're a team that I'm hoping will continue that trend because they looked good, right? Their stream was on. They were pretty happy as they were playing. They didn't give a terrible showing in the final against the EU's finest either. They was 7-4 the first map, and that first map looked quite promising. The second map was, you know, it was a lot worse of a scoreline for them. But the first map did look good, and with a bit more practice, bit more time, they could be a team that we're talking about a lot more in the coming Pro Leagues, in the coming, you know, LAN events.
And I think one thing that the Pro League will do, if we do obviously see these teams make it, you're playing against strong opposition every single week. Typically, you know, the better team you play, the more you lose, the better you can get. You know, losing is learning. I try and preach that all the time. And I think, you know, a lot of Europe have done a lot of losing the past couple of years, let's be honest, and we haven't seemed to learn very much some of the other teams. Hopefully, I think this will force people, especially when it goes over to Pro Leagues. I'm not 100% sure what the rules are on rosters, etc. But it might just force people to have to stay together. You might, I could be wrong with that. They might be able to change much as they want. But realistically, I think if there's a Pro League qualification, you will be expected to keep the majority of your roster. I'd imagine this is me.
Yeah, that's how it works. There are some basic rules in there at the moment, and basically, if you want to keep your points, let me go back to the basics. I guess points are allocated by team rather than by player this time around. So last time a player earned points for their performances in tournaments, and if that player moved teams, they carried those points with them. This time around, the entity of the team, that is what earns that point. So if you make too many roster changes over a course of time, the team essentially gets disbanded and you lose all of those points. So I think you have to keep 3 of the original roster to keep those points. So you have about 2 changes over the course of a season, so you've got to use them wisely. And I'd be surprised if there are teams already that have used one after the first tournament. So you've got to be careful and really take an account of these rules, because you could end up, without the opportunity to change your roster later down the line in the Pro League.
Yeah, I think like maybe touching back on the point of, because of that, do you not think that this is maybe a chance for somebody to try and catch up the EU's finest in Europe with the potential to stick out roster? Because I think that was our issue in Gears 4, was that there was a couple of teams who came a little bit close at the odd local event. There was teams who were getting there, and then they seemed to like break up, and it became increasingly frustrating. And that's even come from somebody who was like not as involved in the gear scene as you guys last year, and I was seeing it like, well, if this makes sense in my head, somebody who hasn't been doing gears nearly as long as anybody else, if this is in my head, why aren't these things being realized by these other teams? To actually knock these people off the top shelf, you need to like practice together. You need to stick together as a team. You aren't chopping and changing all the time. Doesn't seem to work. And I hope that this forces that in to the point where you can't change. Like I know obviously it can come down to talent, but for the most part, everyone is on a fairly similar level. It just comes down to teamwork for them. You would think.
It's putting professional into the Pro League part, right? If you're a Pro League team, you have to be professional about it. You have to, don't think externally, think, hey, what's that new roster change we can do to change the performance? Think internal, what can we change? Let's get on at the same time. Let's practice. This is our weakest map. Let's work on this first, then the rest of them. Let's not just scrim foundation over and over and over again, as we saw in Gears 4. And actually, act as maturely and as professionally as you possibly can, as we see many of these top North American teams, doing, especially in Gears 4, as the stakes really got higher and higher with so much investment and money on the line. Coming back actually to the last Pro League qualifier. One of the surprises to your original question, Chris, was given the surprises actually, was Obey Alliance. That's the organization. So this is, for those unaware, Obey is Breaker, Demonic, Sarkster, TJ, and Warrior. And I think this was probably the biggest surprise in terms of the scoreline, because this is a team that's been performing extremely well, I hear, online in Scrim since the release of the game. I think they hadn't lost a best of 3 or higher map count Scrim the whole time, apart from EU's finest, and everyone was looking at them to really come out and perform in this tournament. But sadly, they actually got knocked out in round 2. They lost by 1 round, and guess who it was to, actually? It was Around the World who eventually got to the final. So that was quite disappointing for them. I spoke to Breaker straight after, about how he's feeling, whatnot. He was quite frustrated with their performance. He felt as though we had many round opportunities to close that one out. And I think that is one team that was quite vocal about the bracket. They've lost out in round 2. They believe they should be placing higher, given their performances online thus far. Yes, scrims admittedly, but still, in terms of how they feel like they stack up the competition, I'm going to be looking at that team in particular in the next one to see how they perform. And just to be clear on this as well, I mean, Breaker, Demonic, they have been known to perform extremely well online and had inconsistent performances in tournaments. And I think, hey, if you want to get into the Pro League, you need to make sure you show up every single time. This seems to be a bit more of a consistent thing where performances can be lackluster when it really matters most. They have the roster, they have the teamwork, they have the experience, and they've had the success so far online. They just need to perform on the day, and I'm personally hoping they can in the next one.
Yeah, to be fair, I think Around the World did play extremely well against them, but you're right. I mean, on paper, you maybe would have given it to Obey, given the amount of time they've been together. They've been playing together for years now. And another surprising result I'd like to very quickly touch on was one of the very, very first round, and that's Tenacity Dragons. They lost to what is essentially a very, very unknown team in LMT Storms.
True, yeah.
And that was in the very first round. And these are one of the teams that actually in the end they've changed their roster. They broke up because of this single
Classic.
tournament. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, they also lost first round in the EGL tournament the week before. So perhaps this team is a team that's been together for about 5 months now and didn't have the performance they wanted to, and it looks like they're going to be going separate ways and going elsewhere with a different roster. I know Bear and James Fanta, they're looking for a new team. So
and that's been a running story actually for those two. They've always been together looking for new players. I think they've played with most people in Europe now since UE. I remember playing with them for a bit actually in scrimming and whatnot. And I think they've played with Shades in the past. And of course, Ant was on that roster as well, another veteran in the scene. But yeah, I mean, Bear and Fanta. Yeah, I mean, if they're still looking for players, they are some,
Elliot will play.
Cutthroat veterans, and
I'm sure he would. Elliot and Fanta are actually good friends as well, so there is a bit of a connection there.
And I think, I mean, just looking at the point distribution for each week, with there now being 5 weeks, actually had about 200 points for first, 120 for second. So, if you are OB Alliance, you only pick up 10 last week. If you think you are toe-to-toe with the leagues around the world here, then, if you go in a second, suddenly you're sitting on 30, you could be doing absolutely fine. So I think you do have the capacity to have a bad week, maybe even 2, and if you went on and then got yourself a few second or third fourths, then you're suddenly back in the running. So I think for all that people are complaining that it is like online based, etc., there is plenty of time for you to have your bad week or to have maybe a potential issue, although we're not saying that issues are fine, but if they do happen, there is more opportunity. You would have to, if you think you are good enough to be in the top 4 to qualify for the Pro League, then you have 5 weeks to be in that top 4. It's not just one. You can, if you are consistently having a bad week or some issues, I think by the end, you've got pretty much nobody to blame but yourselves, because I'd presume the seeding as time goes on is going to be based on what we have in the standings, I would imagine. So, the seeding will sort itself out somewhat anyway. East Finest are going to be going in there first, around the world second, so they'll be either side of the bracket again, but you shouldn't be going in against teams like that as time goes on a little bit further. Things should level themselves out. So I don't think anyone, if they don't make it, has too much of an excuse with 5 weeks of play.
Yeah, especially with that extra week now, right? It's gone from 4 to 5. There's even more chance for teams to progress and claw these points back. But yeah, I think you're totally right. And you mentioned as well, it's top 4 you're fighting for in the world. It's travel around the world to all these different majors. It's a fantastic prize to be aiming for, this top 4 spot. And 36 teams going in top 4. The odds are always against you, right? The 32 teams out of those 36 are going to be disappointed. So more likely than not, you're going to have a rough time at this tournament. It is to weed out those premium teams, those top 4 teams. So I wouldn't get
practicing the most, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't get all that disheartened if you're not one of those top 4 teams, but you are a practice team, or you are a long-term team. There's a lot of chance to come back into this with the way the whole thing is structured, with the the dropping of the bottom team and the coming up the top
relegation
kind of semi-pro team. Yeah, the relegation promotions. So there's a lot of chance here, and just because you don't make that top 4 the first time around doesn't mean that you're a bad team. It just means that in these 5 tournaments you didn't perform, and you've got a quarter to then go back and work on those things before you get another chance to do it. So there's time. There's a lot of time.
A lot of time, a lot of opportunity for everyone this year. Just as we're touching on teams who didn't quite make the cut, outside of the top 4, of course, we see EU's Finest and New Spain, and there are damage. So just going with the don't in shadows. I think outside of that top 4, anybody you look at apart from Obey that you should be doing better in Europe side of things more than anything? Or is this pretty much who you expected to finish top 4 outside of maybe?
There's one team that I kind of think should be up there, and that's Versatile.
Yeah.
They're essentially old Lucent, Chris, for your and the viewers, I guess, knowledge. It's Legends, Exus, Totty, Cougars, and Fractures. So you say those names and you think, yeah, okay, maybe
It's
maybe they
basically the
should be
same
up there.
team almost,
Yeah,
right? Is it
exactly.
Lucent? Is it exactly Lucent? I'm not
Lucent,
sure.
Regal kind of amalgamation.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, in general, they're a very good team that has performed extremely well on LAN. And for me, I'd have thought I would have seen them a little bit further up in that bracket. But again, they got knocked out by Around the World.
Around the world.
Like,
Yeah.
you come back to the same question. Is it just Around the World taking out all these good teams and really just performing?
It could be that. It could be that. I mean, looking at HLH, are they a team? Is that after decent performance last week? What are we thinking about HLH? Are we somewhat reserved on their chances?
I think Enclave are fair enough to win that, to be honest, because they were having some great games. And when I was watching them from the get-go, I had high hopes for them. Not surprised that they beat HLH, to be honest. I think those two teams are probably, similarly ranked, if anything, maybe, top 8, just outside top 4. Definitely both teams you want to keep a lookout for.
Yeah.
In terms of the bracket, the next round after that was EU's finest. So you'd assume that either team would bow out at round 4 when they meet them. But yeah, just to highlight Alex's point, Versatile, I think that is the team to look out for. Them and Obey, I would not be surprised if they can go all the way, either of them. It's just whether they turn up on the day. I think Around the World, Alex, you nailed it. It's just the fact that they showed up in such a big way. They caused the upsets. As much as you'd say they didn't perform, X team. No, I think more so Around the World, they were the ones performing rather than another team lack of performance.
Yeah, on the HLH side of things, I kind of agree. I did get a chance to speak to Fraze. He's their coach, he's Enclave's coach. And he was chatting to me, basically saying, Dovne and Ryan Rybusa both had fantastic tournaments last week, and they really showed up. And without them, he said that they would have been a lot closer to HLH, perhaps even have lost. So there is some credit to be given there in those two players kind of stepping up for their team. But in general, I think it's a very close battle, and these teams, Versatile maybe should be further up. I think Around the World is in that top 3 as well, with our damage as a contender there, and then your teams like Versatile, Obey, HLH, Enclave, all fighting for that kind of 5 to 8. That's how I see it at the moment. But more tournaments to come. Prove me wrong.
I'm gonna throw you all under the bus here. Actually, who are we thinking then? If I was to get a top 4 out of you both for Europe, we know EU's finest are pretty much a shoe in at this. What are we thinking? Top 4 by the end of it.
3 left. By the end of all these tournaments,
by the end,
who do I see coming out?
Qualifying for Pro League from the European region.
That's a tough one. I think. On paper, what I really want to say based on history, you'd assume our damage keep the consistency up, and they're able to, if not get to the final consistently, you'd expect them to perhaps turn up consistently enough to where they slot in and accumulate enough points. I'd throw them in there somewhere. Do you want me to rank them 2, 3, 4? I think that's tough. Honestly,
I'll not ask you to rank them. Actually, screw it. Go on.
I'm gonna bank on history. I think our damage consistent wise, I think I see them coming in second. I think they can slot themselves up there. Versatile, I'd have to throw in there on paper. You'd expect them to have a better week now and really be on people's radars, right? Going forward for the foreseeable future. What's that? That's 3, and then there's a 4th. I think then it's a battle between New Spain and Obey. I mean, I know I'm basing Obey purely on scrims, if you will.
No, Around the World?
Yeah, Around the World, of course. Forgot about them for a second. It's tough.
It's a hard thing to ask.
It's hard because I'm trying to juggle. Yeah, I'm trying to juggle so much in my mind, but there's really not much to go on. Around the World, did they just have one star-studded streak? Is it, is the roster going to maintain itself? Is it just a load of individuals who really performed on the day? That's yet to be seen. Around the World, our damage. Versatile, I think, as it
Behind EU's finals.
stands
Okay.
behind EU's
Okay.
finals. What do you think, Alex? What are you saying?
So I think you've forgotten something. Yeah.
Go on then.
A little guy called Marsh.
Oh no!
and
Yes, I have.
I think you may
Yes, I have.
forgotten him entirely, but
dear.
without throwing you under the bus too much,
Yeah.
I'd see EU's finest, and then Top Boys, who is Marsh's team. So that's Marsh Ashens, J Rage Strikers, and a couple of other people thrown in and out. It used to be Jack, now it's not. So they're a team that I can see getting up there into that top 4, given the right
They
bracket.
lose to.
I'm not.
They lost to New Spain.
So New Spain, very good team.
It was quite controversial, that one.
Yeah, and so
I literally completely forgot about them because I'm only looking at the second half of the bracket on my screen.
Exactly.
I'm kicking myself now.
So there was a bit of controversy there. That we'll not get into too much, but basically, rules aside, that game didn't play as it should have done,
as intended.
Yeah. So I'd go ES Finest, Top Boys, and then you're starting to look at teams like New Spain, like Around the World, like Versatile. My third at the moment would probably be New Spain, and then Around the World, then Versatile is a fifth.
So not even our damage in top 5.
No.
No. Go on then. Why? Why is history working against you?
History is it's a long history, and in general, the players from the time at which these guys were top 2 have fallen off. Right? They're not in this top 2 anymore, and the younger players have come in, and I also don't think they've had the game time. I think a lot of people, I rate our damage. Don't get me wrong. I still think they're up there in that top 6, but I don't think Baghdad's played as much as he could do. Physics maybe isn't up to the level of some of the top tier talent we've got these days. Zorkos will always be brilliant, but again, it's the team as a whole, and I don't think they've got as much practice and as much experience in this style of game as some of these Spanish teams.
One of my biggest concerns, actually, of our damage over the years, as much as I big them up, is actually the roster consistency. Yes, you've always had that. It's like a cycle of top French players. Like our damage is, if you will, like French A team. I think it would be safe to say, like whoever's playing the best at the moment, whoever's playing the most, hey, you're going to get an R damage. It seems like, on paper, that's probably what you'd predict. But that's the concern, right? As EU's finalists have gotten better and better over the years and stronger and cemented themselves internationally, their team has become more consistent roster-wise, and our damage has become less consistent. It's like a flip-flop in roster consistency over the years. And you have French players like Kenny, for example. He stopped playing at one point. Physics quit, came back into Gears 4. Baghdad quit at one point. He's back now. And it's a very inconsistent roster in that sense. I am just banking on the French determination and typical practice effort they put in as a 5, whatever that 5 might be, to actually elevate themselves above these teams and get themselves into the Pro League. Because I know how much it really does mean to them. These French players, they play their heart and soul out at every event. They have some serious team talks before and after grand finals against EU.
Don't get me wrong.
They will want to get into this Pro League. They will any single one of those players. They might want to get more into this Pro League than actually play the game itself.
If you were asking me about a top 4,
all or nothing for them.
A top 4 European teams come San Diego, come December.
It's not
exactly right. Exactly. They'd be up there. They'd be in that top 4 because they are one of the only teams that know how to practice correctly, almost to the standard that EU's finest do. They know how to look at a game and win it in a long series. They're one of the only teams to beat an American team on European soil in MV.
True, yes. Yeah.
And quite honestly, they have it right. They are fantastic players, but right now, no, they're just not in it for me.
Fair enough.
So definitive top 4. Come on, give us the definitive so we can come back to this quite easily.
Well, me and Alex aren't
lost.
going to agree on that because I'm putting my chips in on our damage. And I hope
so
we're
all going to use finest first. I'll even chip in with this one. I think EU's finest will finish first on that one. But
yeah,
second, what was saying, Toby? Maybe not in order, but just give me another team.
A team I didn't mention, or
did mention?
I did mention. Okay, our damage around the world. Oh my goodness me.
I think the point of this conversation.
I have to say Top Boys at that point.
Okay,
I would put Top Boys. As it stands, I would put Top Boys in front of Around the World.
But only because Frew reminded you.
Only because he reminded me at this point. Hey, this bracket doesn't fit on my mod.
It is the bracket. They went out earlier.
Through the bracket, I see these teams. I'm like, all right, that's four. That kind of makes sense. I completely forgot about that roster because the controversy, of course.
Yeah.
You'd expect to see them up there. And they have some roster troubles, with Jack Reaction and whatnot. Who knows how things could develop with them. But yeah, Top Boys, without forgetting about them, EU's finest, and then you have Around the World and Versatile. Is that 4?
That's 4.
Our damage 5.
5.
Our damage would be 5. Our damage would be 5.
Well, if our damage is 4, I don't know.
I think
we'll be here for days.
I think the point
the
point to make that outside first, it's anybody's game at this point. I think this is the good thing. Like, I think sometimes people will harp on about Europe and it's just EU's finest battering everybody, but below EU's finest, seemingly it seems like it's it's a relatively close landscape. Everybody is sort of in and around each other to a point. I think there's arguably outside of EU's finest 5 or 6 teams that could potentially qualify for the Pro League. And I think that's a good situation to be in. Look, everyone expected EU's finest to qualify. Irrelevant if they were playing at the top of their game from what we've seen last year, they were still a shoo-in. Everybody knows they have unlimited amounts of talent. Outside of that, though, we know that Europe, it can be a thriving region. We look at these teams and we look how competitive they can be with each other, and it's going to be great to watch. It's going to be interesting to keep an eye out on for the next 4 weeks. Frew, come on, give me a top 4 then. I know you sort of half give me it, but I just want to
that's fine. EU's finest, Top Boys, New Spain, Around the World.
So I'm going with Old Spain in Versatile, and you're going with New Spain. Fair enough. I'm going for history here, and you're going for current performance, which I like.
Head to head, I would say Versatile would probably beat New Spain. Okay. But I think in general, across the board, I think New Spain do better against some of the other teams.
How versatile they are, if you will, against different teams.
Yeah, their name and their actual
Get L back in.
Yeah, buddy.
Right, well, sure. We were going to go to questions in the chat, but none have come flooding in yet. So if you do want to get them in now. But I think, looking forward to Sunday's tournament, looking forward to tonight as well. It's a good indication to find out where everybody's at playing this week. Just let you guys know if you are still on the stream, or if you're listening, you can't quite catch it, you will be able to catch it on our YouTube. I do believe we will upload the broadcast there as well. But we do actually have casted Trip Cap gameplay coming up after this on the channel, so please do stick around, Toby, and walk you through. Got a nice little graphics package. You won't have to put up with Toby's graphics from last week. I just remember tuning in and seeing Momo's face on the screen at one point. And I was like, what's going on here? Yeah. I did not sanction this. Why is Philip Whitfield on my screen?
Get him out.
But I think, we'll have some gameplay coming up very, very shortly. But I said we're interested to see what happens next week on Sunday, because things will start getting a little bit more serious now. I think, you have a bad first week, that's fine, as we've talked about. Have a bad second week, and suddenly we're a little bit like, oh, okay, you need to make sure you're playing very, very well come the next Sunday. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Thank you very much for joining us, boys. Anything else to say from Toby?
Something I would like to highlight very quickly, or at least give TC props on, is how good they've cut this top 4 or separation for who gets in the Pro League or who doesn't. LATAM, was it top 4? Yeah, top 4 LATAM. I think it was A and B America, which makes sense given how competitive it is for how many teams, through that top 10. And then for EU, I think top 8 would have been a little bit too comfortable for some of these teams. Top 4 really drives competition, I think. You say that about business, right? Competition is what improves products and services and drives improvement. I think that's going to be the case in the EU, because there is, top 6 anywhere, any combination of those teams could get top 4, and none of us would be very, very surprised with that. We might have predicted something else, but we wouldn't be like, what on earth has happened? This is unreal.
Yeah.
Right? Anything could happen, apart from EU's finalists, of course, getting first. But,
yeah.
You know,
and I think, as we said, it creates that competitiveness. But on top of that, when it does come to relegation, etc., shit's going to get spicy. Like, teams are going to have to be very, very careful, because we know it's quite close in and around 4th, 5th, 6th, 3rd, 2nd. Anybody could really have to be careful against people who are going to be possibly coming through. Frew, anything lastly from?
No, I'm just looking at the bracket. That's all from today's tournament. That's all, and we've got some nice matchups.
I'm going to open it up, actually.
Yeah, we've got EU's finest against Top Boys coming up in the semi-final, which could be a very, very good one to get into. That's assuming Top Guys beat Young Guns, but they should, all things considered. And then in the bottom side of things, New Spain just beat our damage, so yeah, props on that one. They did pretty well there.
There you go. Sorry, our damage.
Yeah. So yep, scrap them from your top 4.
Scrap our damage, right?
And then we've also got HLH versus the new Tenacity Dragons lineup, which is also probably a pretty good game.
Cool.
Fanta and Bear picked up Brad, Craze, and Nova. So there's some interesting rosters in this tournament, and I'm excited to see how they do. Tenacity making it. Well, I mean, they're currently in quarterfinals. They've got to play HLH for semi-final spots, but they could potentially get top 4 here, beating that first place knockout they've had in the last couple of tournaments.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody in the chat who lingered around. Thank you very much to everybody for watching. We are going to jump into some gameplay very shortly here on the Twitch, so if you are around, stay around. Toby and Frew will be casting the rest of the Trip Cap Cup, and I'm going to cut it there just so we can get into these games very, very quickly, because the semi-finals are about to start rocking up. So if you are around, stick around, but if you are listening on either Spotify, Apple, or rewatching on YouTube, we will have the links to the VODs from the semi-finals and hopefully the final, if it doesn't take too long, on our YouTube on EPL, of course. So keep an eye on that. Thank you very much for watching episode 3 of Changing Gears. We'll be back next week. Episode number 4, we'll be reviewing we'll pretty much be doing the same of what we've done this week, but just reviewing next week's tournament. So really looking forward to that, and we will catch you guys then.